You know how they say blood is thicker than water? Well, let me tell you about the time I learned that sometimes blood can drown you just as easily as it can save you. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how my sister Charlotte orchestrated the most elaborate betrayal I never saw coming, all for $45,000 I didn't even know existed. It was the spring of 2019 when everything started, though I didn't realize it at the time. Charlotte had just landed this incredible marketing position at a boutique firm in downtown Seattle, the kind of place where everyone looked like they stepped out of a fashion magazine and lunch meetings happened at restaurants I couldn't even afford to walk past. Our parents were over the moon, practically glowing with pride as they announced it to everyone who would listen. Meanwhile, I had just gotten accepted into the Pacific Northwest Art Institute, and when I shared my news, my father's first response was to ask if I'd considered something more practical, like what Charlotte was doing. I remember that night so clearly. The way the rain was tapping against my bedroom window when Charlotte appeared in my doorway at 2:30 in the morning. She never came to my side of the house. We had this unspoken agreement about personal space, so I knew immediately something was terribly wrong. Her usually perfect makeup was streaming down her face in dark rivers, and she was doing this hiccuping thing that happened when she was trying not to sob out loud. She collapsed onto my bed, grabbing my hands with both of hers, cold and trembling. The story came out in fragments between tears. She'd been at the job for 3 weeks, trying desperately to fit in with her new colleagues, who apparently had wardrobes that cost more than our family car. Without thinking, without asking, she'd taken our mother's emergency credit card, the one that was supposed to be for actual emergencies, and charged $4,200 worth of designer clothes. The way she said the number, it was like she couldn't believe it herself. Like maybe if she said it quietly enough, it wouldn't be real. I sat there in my oversized sleep shirt, the one with paint stains from my last project, trying to process what she was telling me. My first instinct was the obvious one: just tell mom the truth, explain what happened, she'd understand eventually. But Charlotte actually laughed at that, this bitter sound that didn't match her usual tinkling giggle at all. She explained that mom would make her quit, would say she wasn't ready for the corporate world, would tell everyone that Charlotte had failed at her very first real job. And then she said the words that changed everything. She needed me to say it was me who used the card. Mom already thought I was irresponsible with money, buying what she called my artistic clothing and supplies I didn't need. She'd believe it coming from me, and the disappointment wouldn't be as sharp because, well, let's be honest, nobody expected me to be the responsible one anyway. The way Charlotte said it, like it was just a fact of life that I was the family disappointment, it stung more than I wanted to admit. But I did it. God help me, I looked at my sister's tear-stained face, and I agreed to take the fall. The next morning was like walking into an ambush I'd volunteered for. Mom found the credit card statement while Charlotte was conveniently already at her prestigious job, and I sat at the kitchen table watching her face transform from confusion to anger to that particular brand of disappointment that only mothers can master. She cut up the credit card right there in front of me, the scissors making this horrible crunching sound with each cut, while lecturing me about how buying gothic accessories wouldn't make me special or artistic or whatever I was trying to be. I got a job that very afternoon at a local coffee shop called The Daily Grind and added evening shifts at a gas station near the highway. My senior year of college, which should have been about finishing my portfolio and preparing for gallery showings, became a blur of steaming milk and restocking energy drinks. 50 hours a week between both jobs, plus trying to keep up with my coursework. I'd prop my art history textbook behind the register at the gas station, stealing glances between customers, highlighting passages with one hand while making change with the other. Meanwhile, Charlotte would come home from her job glowing with stories about client presentations and team lunches at places with cloth napkins and multiple forks. She'd twirl around the living room in her new clothes, the ones I was paying for with my minimum wage paychecks, talking about how impressed her boss was with her professional appearance. The worst part was watching our parents beam at her, so proud of their successful daughter, while looking at me with this mixture of concern and resignation. After 6 months of double shifts and ramen dinners, I finally worked up the courage to ask Charlotte about paying me back. We were in the kitchen, she was making some fancy salad she'd learned about from a coworker, and I was scarfing down a peanut butter sandwich before my evening shift. She actually had the audacity to pause, like she was thinking about it, before telling me that this whole experience had been really good for me, that I was finally learning financial responsibility and work ethic. She said I should be thanking her for the life lesson. Fast forward 3 years to Thanksgiving 2022. Our entire extended family was gathered at my parents' house, the dining room table extended with both leaves and covered in my mother's best china. I was exhausted, having worked until midnight the night before because holiday schedules at the coffee shop were brutal. Charlotte, now a senior coordinator at her firm, was holding court at the table, regaling everyone with stories about her latest business trip to New York. The conversation somehow shifted to student loans and financial planning. Probably because my cousin Beth was starting college soon, I mentioned something about taking out additional loans for graduate school, hoping to finally pursue my MFA now that I'd saved up enough for application fees. That's when Charlotte's eyes lit up with this particular gleam I'd learned to dread over the years. She launched into this speech about financial responsibility, loud enough for all 23 family members to hear, using me as a cautionary tale. She painted this picture of my supposed shopping spree, $4,200 worth of frivolous Gothic clothing and accessories. She talked about how our parents had to teach me a hard lesson, how I'd worked all those awful hours to pay back my irresponsible debt. The way she told it, with this mixture of concern and condescension, like she was worried about me but also slightly amused by my past mistakes. Our aunts and uncles were nodding along. Our cousins were trying not to stare. And our parents sat there letting her tell this fabricated version of events. Something inside me just snapped. 3 years of keeping this secret, 3 years of being the family cautionary tale while she climbed the corporate ladder in designer heels I'd paid for with my sweat and exhaustion. I heard my own voice, surprisingly steady, cut through her monologue. Since we're sharing financial wisdom, I said, why don't you tell everyone what that money really bought? The table went completely silent. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting out the seconds as Charlotte's smile froze on her face. I pulled out my phone, explaining in that same steady voice that working retail had taught me the importance of keeping receipts. I'd photographed everything before paying off the credit card, some instinct telling me I might need proof someday. I listed every purchase, my voice gaining strength with each item. The Diane von Furstenberg wrap dress in navy blue, $348. The Jimmy Choo pumps in nude patent leather, $695. The Theory blazer in charcoal wool, $498. The silk blouses from Nordstrom, the leather laptop bag from Coach, the entire professional wardrobe she was so proud of. All purchased on May 15th, 2019, exactly 3 weeks into her impressive internship. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate, the sound sharp in the silence. I kept going, explaining how Charlotte had come to my room in tears, begging me to take the fall because she couldn't risk her new job. How I'd worked 50 hours a week during my senior year, missing my own senior showcase because I couldn't get the time off. How I'd fallen asleep at my own graduation ceremony from pure exhaustion. All while she got promoted, wearing clothes paid for with my minimum wage paychecks and double shifts. Uncle Richard, who had just finished toasting Charlotte as the family's shining success story, sat frozen with his wine glass still half raised. Aunt Martha stared at Charlotte like she was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. Even my teenage cousins had stopped looking at their phones, sensing that something monumental was happening at the adults' table. Charlotte's mouth opened and closed several times, like she was trying to find words that would make this all go away. When she finally managed to stammer something about how I had needed to learn responsibility anyway, that's when I completely lost any semblance of composure I had left. I told them about the nights I'd done homework in the gas station break room, propping my eyes open with coffee I couldn't really afford, about watching her get promoted to coordinator, then senior coordinator, climbing the corporate ladder in heels bought with my exhaustion and sacrifice. My mother whispered something I'll never forget, her voice barely audible but carrying across the silent table. My God, she said, staring at Charlotte with tears in her eyes. We punished Emma for months. We made her pay back every penny while you... Her voice just broke, unable to finish the sentence. My father had his head in his hands, and I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. I looked at both of them, these parents who had believed Charlotte's story so easily, who had spent 3 years disappointed in me for something I hadn't even done. Too little, too late, I said, and I meant it. The damage was done, the years were lost, and their tears couldn't give them back to me. I woke up the next morning to my phone buzzing insistently on my nightstand. 47 missed calls, butt sauce. More text messages than I could count, emails marked urgent flooding my inbox. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through them, trying to make sense of what was happening. The Art Institute had withdrawn my acceptance. My portfolio advisor was trying to reach me. The dean's office needed to speak with me immediately. I called the admissions office with trembling fingers, listening to that horrible hold music. 7 minutes of cheerful piano that felt like it was mocking my growing panic. When the admissions counselor finally answered, her voice was carefully neutral, professionally distant. Someone had sent them evidence, she explained, that I had plagiarized my entire portfolio. Screenshots from my Instagram had been edited to show earlier timestamps than my submitted work, making it look like I'd posted other artists' work as my own, then submitted it to the school. My phone vibrated mid-conversation. Charlotte's name appeared on the screen with a text message. My stomach dropped as I read it, her words casual and cruel. Something about how financial responsibility included protecting your intellectual property, about the importance of password security for cloud storage, and at the end, like a knife twisted for fun, a simple shrug emoji. When I tried to screenshot her confession, my phone screen went black. It flickered back on, then black again, then stayed dark for 30 seconds before returning. I remembered with growing horror that night in 2019 when Charlotte had borrowed my phone, claiming hers had died. She'd had it for 20 minutes, said she needed to check something important for work. I'd been too exhausted from my double shift to think anything of it. The admissions counselor was still talking, explaining their review process and how seriously they took academic integrity when my mother's call came through. I hung up on the school to answer, already knowing what was coming. Mom didn't even say hello before launching into her attack. How dare I humiliate Charlotte at Thanksgiving? How could I be so cruel after everything our family had done for me? Charlotte had called her that morning, devastated by my public betrayal. I needed to apologize immediately. I tried to explain about the art school, about Charlotte's text, about what was happening, but Mom cut me off mid-sentence. This was just like me, she said, always making everything about myself, always playing the victim. The accusation hit harder than any physical blow could have. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my childhood bedroom, watching my future crumble in real time. My hands shook as I raced to my laptop, trying to log into my Google account. Invalid password. I tried again, carefully typing each character. Invalid. Password reset requested. The recovery email had been changed. The security questions, too. When had I given Charlotte access to fix my account security? Right after the credit card incident, I remembered with growing dread. She'd insisted on helping me set up two-factor authentication, said she was worried about me after my mistake. Through my bedroom window, I watched Charlotte's BMW pull into our parents' driveway. She got out carrying a tray of expensive coffee and a pink bakery box, playing the role of the devoted daughter, bringing comfort food after family drama. My phone rang again. This time it was my manager from the coffee shop, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Someone had filed a detailed complaint about me stealing tips. Anonymous, of course, but very specific. They knew about particular shifts, exact amounts that had supposedly gone missing. I needed to come in immediately. I stared at the phone after he hung up, trying to calculate the impossible. The coffee shop was 20 minutes away in one direction. The art school dean would be in his office in 30 minutes in the opposite direction. I couldn't be in both places, couldn't save both parts of my life at once. I chose the school because it was my future, my dreams, everything I'd worked toward. The coffee shop was just money. I told myself I could find another job. By the time I called the coffee shop back to explain, it was too late. My manager had already made his decision. 3 years of perfect attendance, glowing reviews, regular customers who asked for me by name, none of it mattered against an anonymous complaint with specific details. "Don't bother coming in for your last check," he said coldly. "We'll mail it." I sat on my bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes because I hadn't even had the energy to change, watching through my window as Charlotte hugged our parents in the kitchen below. She'd changed into a soft pink sweater, her hair in a messy bun, playing the grieving sister seeking comfort after her sibling's cruel attack. My phone lit up with an Instagram notification. Charlotte had posted a story. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. It was a selfie with our parents, coffee cups raised in what looked like a toast. The caption read, "Healing begins with truth and forgiveness." In the background, barely visible on the kitchen counter, I could see a familiar piece of fabric. The Diane von Furstenberg dress, the navy blue one that had cost $348 in 3 weeks of double shifts. The dean's office called while I was still staring at that photo. The evidence against me was comprehensive, they said. Videos compiled from my Instagram stories showing me working on pieces, but with audio spliced in from somewhere else, me talking about taking inspiration from established artists. The timestamps showed these videos predated my portfolio submission by months. I recognized my own voice in the audio, conversations with Charlotte from years ago, recorded without my knowledge. Casual talks about my art process, about artists I admired, taken completely out of context and twisted into admissions of theft. My best friend Mia texted next, her words careful and concerned. Charlotte had reached out to Mia's boyfriend with worries about my mental health. She'd sent screenshots of messages I'd supposedly sent talking about dark thoughts, about feeling like I couldn't go on. Mia wanted to know if I was okay, but there was distance in her words, doubt creeping in where trust used to be. I threw on clothes and ordered an Uber to campus, spending 20 minutes in traffic refreshing my email, watching rejection after rejection pile up. The driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror as I muttered to myself, trying to piece together how many ways Charlotte had accessed my life, how many back doors she'd built into my digital existence. When I finally made it to Professor Martinez's office, the building looked different somehow, like it was already pushing me out. He usually kept my physical portfolio in his office, said he liked showing it to other faculty members as an example of unique artistic vision. His door was open, and I found him sitting at his desk with my portfolio spread before him. Several crucial pages were missing, the ones that most clearly showed my artistic development over the years, my style evolution from student to artist. The security footage from the previous night had mysteriously corrupted, he told me, but the janitor had mentioned seeing someone in the building. A nice blonde lady who said she was my sister, picking up something I'd forgotten. My phone buzzed with another message from Charlotte, this time about my gas station job. She'd already reached out to that manager too, sharing her concerns about my confession at Thanksgiving, about my history of financial irresponsibility. I sank into the chair across from Professor Martinez, looking at 3 years of work scattered across his desk, with gaping holes where the most important pieces should be. The remaining pieces looked disconnected, amateur without the context of the missing pages that showed my growth and development. My roommate Sarah texted while I sat there. She'd gotten emails about my theft history, anonymous but detailed. She wanted to talk about our living situation. The trust was gone, she said. Could I start looking for somewhere else to live? I opened my password manager app on my phone, desperate for any access to my accounts. Any way to stop this avalanche Charlotte had started. The last login showed Charlotte's device from 3 days ago. 3 days before Thanksgiving, before I'd said anything about the dress. She'd been planning this, preparing for the possibility that I might finally tell the truth. My phone screen went black again, staying dark for a full 30 seconds before flickering back to life. A reminder that Charlotte could see everything I did, could control my digital life whenever she wanted. The gas station manager called while I was still in Professor Martinez's office. Charlotte had visited in person, he said, as a concerned sister. She'd brought printouts of my Thanksgiving confession, explained about my history of financial problems. He appreciated her looking out for me, but he couldn't have someone with admitted theft history handling cash registers. 2 jobs gone in one morning. My savings would last maybe 2 months if I was extremely careful, less if I had to find a new apartment quickly. Professor Martinez looked at me with something between pity and disappointment as I left his office. He'd believed in my talent, had written recommendation letters, had championed my work. Now, he looked at me like he wasn't sure what was true anymore. The bus ride home took 40 minutes, and I spent every second of it piecing together the timeline of Charlotte's preparations. Every borrowed phone over the years, every helpful security fix, every casual conversation about my art that she'd apparently recorded. She'd been building this for years, creating an arsenal of weapons disguised as sisterly interactions. When I got home, Charlotte's car was gone, but the damage was complete. Mom barely looked at me when I walked in, and Dad muttered something about disappointment before retreating to his study. I climbed the stairs to my room, each step feeling heavier than the last, like I was walking through quicksand. That's when I found the legal document in my email buried in the flood of rejections and warnings. Charlotte had filed a petition 2 days before Thanksgiving to become my financial conservator, citing a pattern of irresponsible behavior that required intervention. 2 days before I'd said anything about the dress, before our family dinner, before any of this had exploded. She'd known I might break, might finally tell the truth, and she'd prepared for it. The petition was comprehensive, documenting my supposed financial irresponsibility going back years. The credit card incident, of course, but also smaller things I hadn't even noticed. Time she'd paid for dinner and I'd forgotten to pay her back immediately. The used car I'd bought that had needed repairs. My choice to pursue art instead of a more stable career. All of it painted a picture of someone who couldn't manage adult responsibilities. My roommate's eviction notice arrived by email that evening. She wanted me out by the end of the week, couldn't live with someone she couldn't trust. I stared at my reflection in my laptop screen, trying to recognize the person Charlotte had turned me into in everyone's eyes. 3 years ago, I'd been the sister who sacrificed to protect her. Now, I was the unstable one who'd attacked her at a family dinner. I packed what I could fit into 2 suitcases while my parents stayed downstairs, pretending I didn't exist. The eviction from my apartment meant I had nowhere to go except back to this house where I was now unwelcome. Through my window, I watched a process server hand my father papers at the front door. His face went pale as he read them, and within minutes, both my parents were at my bedroom door. Mom held the papers with shaking hands. Charlotte had filed for a restraining order, citing my escalating harassment and the threatening confrontation at Thanksgiving. Dad's voice was cold as he explained that I couldn't stay in the house if Charlotte felt unsafe visiting. They'd already consulted their lawyer. I had 24 hours to find somewhere else, or they'd have to formally evict me to comply with the potential restraining order. I called Aunt Martha, swallowing what was left of my pride. She listened to my explanation, then sighed deeply. She had a spare room, but only if I admitted my mistakes, and agreed to get therapy for my jealousy issues. Charlotte had already called her, crying about my obsession with her success, my inability to accept responsibility for my own failures. That evening, I worked what turned out to be my final shift at the gas station. Regular customers avoided eye contact, and I realized word had spread about my theft confession at Thanksgiving. Charlotte's version of events had already become the truth in everyone's minds. During my break, I discovered her latest move. She'd posted in our neighborhood Facebook group about feeling unsafe after my public attack. The comments were brutal. People I'd known since childhood called me unstable, suggested I needed professional help, praised Charlotte for her strength in speaking out. My phone screen flickered black again, and when it came back, my Instagram was logged out. The password had been changed. My digital art portfolio, years of work, documentation of my artistic journey, all locked away. Charlotte was erasing me piece by piece, removing any evidence that might contradict the narrative she was building. After midnight, I returned to my parents' house to find my belongings already packed in boxes by the front door. A note from my mother said they'd paid for a week at a nearby motel until I could figure things out. There was no signature, no love, no acknowledgement that I was their daughter. Just a business transaction to get me out of their lives. The motel room smelled like cigarettes and industrial cleaner. I sat on the thin mattress, laptop open, trying to access any of my accounts. Everything was locked. But then I remembered my old tablet, the one I'd used freshman year before upgrading. It might still be logged into my cloud storage from before Charlotte's security help. I drove to the storage unit where I'd kept my college things, fumbling with the lock in the darkness. Inside, buried under old art supplies and textbooks, I found the tablet with a dead battery. I sat in my car, charging it from the cigarette lighter, holding my breath as it slowly powered on. By some miracle, it was still logged in. I started downloading everything I could: portfolio pieces, photos, documents, transferring them to a USB drive I'd bought at a 24-hour gas station. My phone rang just as I finished. Liam McDermott, a name I didn't recognize. He identified himself as a former intern at Charlotte's company, fired 6 months ago for supposedly misusing company funds. He'd seen the neighborhood Facebook post about the Thanksgiving incident. He had information about Charlotte that I needed to hear, but we needed to meet in person. The next morning, I met Liam at a diner 2 towns over. He looked exhausted, with the same hollow eyes I'd been seeing in my own reflection. He'd been working 3 jobs since Charlotte destroyed his career, trying to rebuild his reputation. He showed me emails, receipts, documentation he'd kept. Charlotte had been charging personal shopping to the company credit card, then blamed him when accounting noticed. She'd convinced everyone he was a thief, gotten him fired, destroyed his references, made sure he'd never work in marketing again. The receipts showed Charlotte's shopping patterns, her signatures on the forms, but his non-disclosure agreement prevented him from using them in any legal proceeding. He could share them with me, but I couldn't use them in court. I recorded our conversation on my phone, using the same tactics Charlotte had taught me. If she could build an arsenal, so could I. Liam described how Charlotte had manipulated their boss, played the victim when her theft was discovered, cried in meetings about feeling targeted by the intern who'd exposed her. The pattern was achingly familiar. After Liam left, I sat in my car in the diner parking lot, processing the revelation that I wasn't special. I wasn't Charlotte's only victim. I was just her latest, and probably not her last. My phone buzzed with a text from someone named Grace. She said she was Charlotte's current roommate, and she was drunk, and she felt guilty about something. Charlotte had been laughing earlier about the financial education she'd given me, calling it her masterpiece. But there was more. Grace mentioned another girl, someone named Rebecca, from Charlotte's college years. Another person Charlotte had taught a lesson. Grace's next text came immediately after, clearly not from her. Charlotte had seen the messages and forced Grace to retract everything. The text said I was harassing Grace now, that she would be adding this to the restraining order petition. The message ended with, "She made me send this," before Charlotte caught that too and made Grace send another message denying everything. I drove to the courthouse to file my response to the restraining order. The clerk looked at me with pity as I submitted my handwritten statement. I couldn't afford a lawyer, while Charlotte had retained one of the city's best firms, someone her company used for corporate matters. Outside the courthouse, I searched for Rebecca Patterson, Charlotte's college roommate. I found her on LinkedIn, working as a teacher 3 states away. Her social media was locked down tight, but I found an old college newspaper article about a student expelled for academic dishonesty. Rebecca Patterson, junior year, lost her scholarship and never graduated. The timing lined up perfectly with when Charlotte had suddenly needed a single dorm room. I messaged Rebecca through LinkedIn, explaining who I was and why I was reaching out. Her response came within an hour, brief and painful. She couldn't help me. Charlotte had destroyed her college dreams over a petty roommate dispute about noise and visitors. She'd rebuilt her life, become a teacher through alternative certification, and couldn't go through that again. But she confirmed what I suspected. Charlotte had planted evidence of cheating, made false reports to professors, systematically destroyed Rebecca's future because she'd asked Charlotte to keep the music down after midnight. The restraining order hearing was in 3 days. I spent them living in my car, showering at the gym, applying for jobs using coffee shop Wi-Fi. Every application asked about criminal history, references, previous employment. I had nothing good to offer. My references were managers who thought I was a thief. My previous employment had ended in accusations and firing. I had no criminal history yet, but Charlotte was working on that too. Professor Martinez texted asking to meet. He'd found something in his old files, sketches from 2018 that proved my portfolio's originality. But when Charlotte learned he was helping me, she'd visited his office. The security footage from her visit was mysteriously corrupted, just like the night she'd stolen my portfolio pieces. But afterward, Martinez had requested an immediate transfer to another campus, effective immediately. He gave me the sketches and, when I pressed him, admitted Charlotte had threatened his career if he testified on my behalf. He had a family to think about, he said. He couldn't risk it. The evidence kept piling up, but none of it was admissible in court. Everything I gathered required breaking rules Charlotte could cite as harassment. Every person who might help me had been threatened or compromised. She'd planned for this, counted on my desperation making me reckless, making me look exactly as unstable as she claimed I was. At the restraining order hearing, Charlotte arrived looking fragile and professional in a conservative gray suit. She'd brought character witnesses from work, printouts of my threatening social media posts that I'd never made, documentation of my break-in to retrieve my tablet from storage. She cried delicately as she described living in fear since Thanksgiving, checking over her shoulder, unable to sleep. Her lawyer presented security footage from her office building showing me waiting outside looking aggressive. What the footage didn't show was that I'd been there for a job interview at a different company in the same building, but context didn't matter. The image was damning. I represented myself, my voice shaking as I tried to explain the systematic destruction of my life. The judge looked skeptical. Where was my evidence? Why hadn't I reported this harassment earlier? Did I have any witnesses? When I mentioned Liam and Rebecca, Charlotte's lawyer objected. Hearsay from disgruntled former employees and college acquaintances wasn't evidence. The judge agreed. The temporary restraining order was granted. I couldn't go within 500 feet of Charlotte, her home, or her workplace. The building where I'd been interviewing for jobs was now off limits. Another avenue closed, another piece of my life carved away. Walking out of the courthouse, I checked my bank balance on my phone. $300 left. The motel week was almost up. My car insurance payment was due tomorrow. Then I saw it, buried in my spam folder. A legal notice I'd almost missed in the chaos. Charlotte had filed for conservatorship, claiming I was mentally unstable and unable to manage my finances. The hearing was next week. If she won, she'd control everything I owned, every penny I earned, every decision about my life. My hands shook as I read through the filing. That's when I found it, mentioned almost casually in the paperwork. Something about protecting family assets that needed to be preserved. What family assets? We weren't wealthy. Our parents lived paycheck to paycheck, had refinanced the house twice to pay for our educations. I called my cousin Jake, the lawyer who'd helped with Grandma's estate 2 years ago. He was reluctant to talk at first. Charlotte's boss was his firm's biggest client. But when I mentioned the conservatorship filing, something in his voice changed. There was something in Grandma's will, he said carefully. A trust fund for the grandchild who needed it most. $45,000, accessible when they turn 25. I turn 25 next month. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Charlotte had known about the trust fund. She'd planned this for years, waiting for me to get close to 25. The credit card incident when I was 22, the security help, the recorded conversations, all of it had been preparation for this moment. She needed me to look unstable, irresponsible, incapable of managing money. The Thanksgiving confession had been my mistake, giving her the opening she needed to accelerate her timeline. I drove to the courthouse records office and found Grandma's will in the public files. There it was in black and white, $45,000 in trust to be distributed to the grandchild who demonstrated the greatest need at age 25. The trustee would decide based on evidence of need and capability to manage the funds responsibly. The trustee was whoever had legal guardianship or conservatorship over the beneficiary, if applicable. Charlotte had created my need, then positioned herself to manage the solution. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, engine off to save gas, finally understanding the full scope of what my sister had done. This wasn't just about money. This was about complete control, about rewriting reality to suit her needs. She'd turned our entire family against me, destroyed my career, made me unemployable and homeless, all to steal an inheritance I hadn't even known existed. My phone rang. Unknown number. The art school dean's voice was professionally sympathetic as he delivered the final blow. While they'd found no definitive evidence of plagiarism, the reputational concerns and ongoing legal issues made my acceptance untenable. They wished me luck in my future endeavors. I laughed, actually laughed, sitting alone in my car. What future endeavors? Charlotte had made sure I had no future at all. I drove to Charlotte's apartment building, careful to park outside the restraining order radius. I wasn't there to confront her. I just needed to sit where she'd destroyed my life and figure out what to do next. That's when I saw Liam's car in visitor parking. As I watched, he entered the building using a residence key code. He wasn't visiting Charlotte. She didn't know what he looked like. He was visiting someone else in the building. I texted him and he responded immediately. He'd been dating a girl on the 4th floor for months, had learned the building's rhythms and routines. He knew things about Charlotte's life that might help. We met at a park just outside the restraining order radius. Liam had been watching Charlotte, waiting for his chance at justice. He'd seen her bring home boxes of files from work that she wasn't supposed to have. He'd photographed her using the company car for personal errands, documented small violations that added up to a pattern of misusing company resources. More importantly, he'd kept in touch with other former employees. 3 others had similar stories of Charlotte finding ways to blame them for her mistakes, getting them fired, destroying their careers. Her pattern of workplace manipulation went back years, but everyone was too scared or legally constrained to speak up. I made a decision that night. If I was going down, I'd document everything. Not for court, where Charlotte had all the advantages, but for the truth. I started a blog, anonymous but detailed. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered, every connection I'd found, every pattern I'd identified. Liam contributed his files after I promised to keep his name out of it. Slowly, others began sharing their stories too. Charlotte found the blog within days. Her lawyer sent cease and desist letters to the hosting company. But I'd learned from her tactics. Multiple backups, mirror sites, everything archived on servers in different jurisdictions. The truth was harder to erase than she'd expected. The conservatorship hearing arrived with Charlotte looking perfectly composed. She'd prepared extensively, presenting documentation of my mental instability, the job losses, the eviction, the restraining order, the art school rejection. On paper, I looked exactly as unstable as she'd painted me. But I'd prepared too. I'd requested a psychiatric evaluation from a court-approved doctor, which would delay the hearing by 3 days. Charlotte's lawyer argued against it, but the judge agreed. If I was truly unstable, an evaluation would prove it. Those 3 days of psychiatric evaluation were surreal. I told the complete truth to Dr. Elizabeth Chen, every detail of what Charlotte had done. She listened, took notes, asked careful questions. Charlotte had already called the facility multiple times, expressing concern for my well-being and suggesting specific symptoms the doctor should watch for. But Dr. Chen saw through it. Her evaluation cleared me of any mental illness beyond acute stress reaction to family conflict and financial abuse. It wasn't enough to stop the conservatorship entirely, but it bought me time. The judge scheduled another hearing in 2 weeks to review all the evidence. I used those 2 weeks strategically. I found Rebecca through a teaching forum and convinced her to write a letter about Charlotte's pattern, even if she wouldn't testify. I connected with two of Charlotte's former coworkers who'd been bullied into quitting. They wouldn't testify either, but their written statements showed remarkable consistency in Charlotte's methods. The blog grew exponentially. Other victims of family financial abuse found it, shared their own stories. Some had lost less than me, some had lost more, but the patterns were eerily similar. A trusted family member who slowly gained access, who built a case over years, who struck when the victim was most vulnerable. Charlotte tried repeatedly to get the blog taken down, but I'd learned her own tactics too well. Stay just within legal bounds, document obsessively, let the truth speak for itself. 5 days before the next conservatorship hearing, Charlotte made her first real mistake. She posted on Instagram about supporting family members through mental health struggles. She was wearing the Diane von Furstenberg dress, the same one from the Thanksgiving photos. The post was up for less than an hour before she deleted it, but Liam had been watching. He screenshot it and sent it to me immediately. It wasn't much, but it was something. Evidence that she still had the clothes I'd paid for, that she was still benefiting from the lie that started everything. I'd been living in my car for 2 weeks, showering at the gym, working temporary gigs through apps that didn't check references. Rock bottom felt like a strange kind of freedom. Charlotte had taken everything she could. There was nothing left to lose, which meant there was nothing left to fear. The night before the hearing, I parked outside the storage unit where I was keeping my few remaining possessions. I reviewed every piece of evidence, every testimony, every connection I'd found. It wouldn't be enough for court, but it painted a picture that was becoming harder to ignore. Charlotte's pattern of destruction, documented across years and victims, the trust fund motive that explained the timing, the calculated cruelty of it all. My phone buzzed. Mom. Finally reaching out after weeks of silence. She'd found the blog through a cousin who'd recognized the story. She'd read everything, seen the evidence, started recognizing Charlotte's manipulations over the years. She was sorry, but what could she do now? The lawyers were involved, the damage was done. I told her about the trust fund, the $45,000 Charlotte was trying to steal. Mom went silent for a long time. She hadn't known. Dad hadn't known. Charlotte had kept that secret, planning her final move like a chess master thinking 10 steps ahead. The conservatorship hearing would decide everything. If Charlotte won, she'd control my finances, my choices, my life. The trust fund would be hers to manage for my benefit, which meant it would disappear into administrative fees and loans to herself that would never be repaid. If I won, I'd still be jobless, homeless, my reputation destroyed, but I'd be free. And sometimes freedom is all you have left to fight for. I spent that last night in my car writing, not for the blog, but for myself. Documenting every moment, every decision, every consequence of trusting the wrong person with the right DNA. Win or lose tomorrow, I wanted a record of the truth, unfiltered and complete. As dawn broke over the parking lot, I prepared for court one more time. I showered at the gym, put on my only clean outfit, gathered my inadmissible evidence and my psychiatric evaluation and my written statements from Charlotte's other victims. The hearing was at 9 a.m. Charlotte would arrive polished, prepared, protected by expensive lawyers in a system that believed whoever could afford to look credible. I would arrive alone, armed only with the truth she'd spent years teaching me to document. 3 years of preparation on her side, 3 weeks of desperate documentation on mine. But I'd learned something in those 3 weeks of scrambling to save my life. Sometimes the best teacher is your worst enemy. Charlotte had taught me about documentation, about passwords, about financial systems. She'd shown me how to build a case slowly, carefully, comprehensively. She'd demonstrated how to turn someone's life into evidence against them. She just hadn't expected me to take notes. The courthouse parking lot was already filling up when I arrived at 8:30. I had to circle 3 times before finding a spot in the back corner. My hands left sweat stains on the steering wheel as I gathered my folders. Through the glass doors, I could see Charlotte's legal team already setting up at their table, laying out documents with practiced efficiency. The security line moved slowly, each minute ticking by like an hour. The guard examined my USB drive suspiciously, running it through the metal detector twice before waving me through. Charlotte entered the courtroom at exactly 8:55, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than I'd made in 3 months at the coffee shop. She brought three character witnesses from her company, all dressed in coordinating shades of corporate respectability. Her lawyer had a stack of documents thick enough to use as a weapon, all tagged with those little colored flags that screamed preparation and competence. I sat alone at the defendant's table with my single folder and a court-appointed advocate who'd met me exactly 10 minutes ago. She seemed nice enough but overwhelmed, flipping through my response while Charlotte's team arranged their evidence like an army preparing for battle. Judge Catherine Chen entered at 9 sharp, reviewing the conservatorship petition with the kind of careful attention that made my stomach clench. Charlotte's lawyer began with my pattern of instability, each point supported by documentation that twisted truth into weapon. The job losses became evidence of inability to maintain employment. The eviction became proof of irresponsibility. The restraining order became demonstration of dangerous behavior. Even my psychiatric evaluation was spun expertly. Acute stress reaction became evidence of mental fragility. The doctor's notes about family conflict became proof I couldn't maintain relationships. When Charlotte took the stand, she was perfect. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she described finding me going through her things multiple times over the years. Her voice trembled when she talked about living in fear since Thanksgiving, about loving me, but recognizing I needed help. She mentioned our grandmother's trust fund as an afterthought, something she'd only recently discovered while reviewing family documents out of concern for my future. The way she told it, she was the reluctant hero, forced to take action to save me from myself. My advocate's cross-examination was weak, tentative. Charlotte had answers for everything, each response practiced and polished. Yes, she'd helped me with my passwords in 2019, but only because I'd asked after the credit card incident proved I couldn't manage my own security. No, she'd never accessed my accounts without permission. The idea was absurd. Perhaps I was confused, mixing up memories. It happened sometimes with stress. During the lunch recess, I sat in my car reviewing my evidence one more time. Liam had texted offering to testify despite his NDA, but we both knew it would end his last chance at rebuilding his career. Rebecca had sent another message, wishing me luck but reiterating she couldn't get involved. Even Professor Martinez had gone completely silent after Charlotte's threat. The afternoon session focused on my current circumstances, each detail painting a picture of complete deterioration. Living in my car, no steady employment, bank account nearly empty. Charlotte's witnesses testified about her exemplary character, her concern for family, her reluctance to take this step. The therapist Charlotte had consulted spoke about typical patterns in cases of sibling financial abuse, carefully implying that I was the abuser, not her. When my turn finally came, I tried to tell the truth. But without admissible evidence, truth sounds like conspiracy. I mentioned Liam but couldn't provide his testimony. I brought up Rebecca but had only her refusal to help. I tried to explain the blog, the patterns, the other victims, but Charlotte's lawyer objected to unsubstantiated internet rumors. The judge agreed. I pulled out the USB drive with everything I'd saved, the edited Instagram videos, the timestamp analysis. The judge reviewed it briefly before Charlotte's lawyer pointed out I had no technical expertise to validate my claims. My analysis meant nothing without an expert witness I couldn't afford. The recording from Professor Martinez was inadmissible, made without consent in a two-party consent state. My advocate hadn't even known I had it. By 4 in the afternoon, I was drowning in legal procedures and rules that turned evidence into hearsay, truth into speculation. Charlotte had spent years preparing for this exact moment. I'd had 3 weeks of desperate scrambling. The imbalance showed in every objection sustained, every piece of evidence dismissed. Charlotte's lawyer made their closing argument with the confidence of someone who'd already won. I was clearly a young woman in crisis, unable to manage basic responsibilities. The pattern was undeniable. Job losses, homelessness, paranoid fixation on my successful sister. The trust fund would provide resources for my care, with Charlotte ensuring it was used responsibly for therapy, housing assistance, and eventually, when I was stable enough, job training. My advocate did her best, but even she seemed to be going through the motions. She pointed out that I'd held steady employment for years before recent events. The psychiatric evaluation showed no actual mental illness. The timing of Charlotte's petition raised questions, but without hard evidence, it all sounded like desperate excuses. Judge Chen deliberated for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. When she returned, her expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. She acknowledged the situation was complicated, that family conflicts often involved hurt feelings and misunderstandings on both sides. However, the evidence clearly showed I was in a deteriorating situation that required intervention. The conservatorship was granted for 1 year, with mandatory review after 6 months. Charlotte would control all my finances, including any inheritance or trust funds. I was required to maintain stable housing and employment approved by the conservator. Weekly therapy sessions were mandated with a therapist of Charlotte's choosing. Any violation would result in extending the conservatorship indefinitely. Charlotte actually cried as the judge delivered her decision. Real tears this time, or such a good performance I couldn't tell the difference. She approached me after the judge left, reaching out like she wanted to hug me. I stepped back instinctively, bumping into the table hard enough to bruise. "I just want to help you," she whispered, loud enough for others to hear. "I love you, Emma. This is for your own good." My advocate guided me out of the courtroom while Charlotte stayed behind, accepting congratulations from her character witnesses on the difficult but necessary steps she'd taken. Outside on the courthouse steps, I sat in the cold December air, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with the official order. Charlotte now controlled everything. My bank accounts would be transferred to her oversight. Any money I earned would go into accounts she managed. The trust fund I would have accessed in 3 weeks now belonged to her to distribute as she saw fit. Mom called while I was still sitting there. She'd watched from the gallery, torn between her 2 daughters. Her voice was careful, like she was walking on emotional eggshells. She suggested I come home, follow the court's requirements, let Charlotte help me get back on my feet. The same enabling pattern that had created this disaster in the first place. I hung up without responding. That night, I parked behind a 24-hour grocery store and used their Wi-Fi to update the blog one final time. I posted the court's decision, the truth about the trust fund, the years of planning that had led to this moment. Within an hour, Charlotte's lawyer had sent another cease and desist. The hosting company pulled the site, but the internet has a longer memory than Charlotte expected. Others had already archived everything. Screenshots circulated in forums about financial abuse, toxic families, conservatorship corruption. Charlotte couldn't erase everything, though she'd won everything that legally mattered. The next morning, I met with the therapist Charlotte had chosen, Dr. Patricia Morse, in a strip mall office that smelled like air freshener and defeat. The first session focused entirely on my persecution complex regarding Charlotte, my inability to accept help, my pattern of blaming others for my mistakes. I sat in silence for most of it, knowing anything I said would be reported back to Charlotte, twisted into evidence of continued instability. Charlotte had arranged a job for me at a call center, one of those soul-crushing places where you repeat the same script hundreds of times a day. Minimum wage, monitored hours, direct deposit to an account she controlled. She'd also found me a room in a boarding house that would accept tenants with no credit history or references. Shared bathroom, no kitchen privileges, a hot plate that only worked sometimes. But it satisfied the stable housing requirement. My new routine began immediately. Work at 8, therapy at 5 on Thursdays, Charlotte reviewing my purchases weekly and questioning every expense. She allowed me $50 a week for food and necessities. The rest went toward paying down debts I'd never incurred, administrative fees for managing my affairs, therapy costs that insurance didn't cover. Within 3 weeks, I turned 25. The trust fund transferred automatically to the conservatorship account. $45,000 I couldn't touch, couldn't use, couldn't even see, except in quarterly reports Charlotte filed with the court. She sent me a text about investing it responsibly for my future, about how proud Grandma would be that the money was being used to help me get stable. I didn't respond. I'd learned that silence was my only form of resistance left. The boarding house was filled with people like me, broken by circumstances beyond their control, starting over with nothing but court orders and shattered pride. We didn't talk much, but we understood each other. Everyone there was running from something or someone. The man next door had lost everything in a business lawsuit. The woman down the hall was escaping an ex-husband who drained their accounts. We were all refugees from lives that had been stolen by people who were supposed to love us. My art supplies remained in storage, but Charlotte had deemed them non-essential and sold most of them without telling me. She kept the portfolio pieces, she explained at our monthly meeting, as evidence of my improvement under her care. Proof that I was getting better, even if I couldn't see it yet. Sometimes during lunch breaks at the call center, I'd sketch on napkins, muscle memory keeping my skills alive even if my spirit was dying. The 6-month review approached with grim inevitability. Charlotte's lawyer prepared a report showing my compliance. Steady job, stable housing, attending therapy, following all requirements. Dr. Morse wrote that I still showed resistance to accepting help. Recommended continuing therapy indefinitely. The conservatorship would continue. The judge barely looked at me during the 5-minute hearing. A year passed in a blur of monitored existence. Another review, another extension. Charlotte suggested increasing therapy to twice a week. The judge agreed. More money diverted from my wages to treatment I didn't need for conditions I didn't have. Liam sent a wedding invitation. He'd rebuilt his life in another city, found love, started fresh. I couldn't attend. Travel required Charlotte's approval, and she was concerned it might destabilize my progress. But seeing his happiness gave me something I'd lost, proof that Charlotte's victims could survive if they escaped completely. 2 years in, Charlotte made her first real mistake since the Instagram post. She used some of the trust fund for a down payment on a vacation home, filing it as an investment for my future stability. Technically legal under conservatorship law, but morally questionable enough that people started noticing. Someone who'd followed the blog recognized the address, connected the dots, started asking questions in forums Charlotte couldn't control. The court didn't care. Charlotte's lawyer spun it as responsible investment of funds that would benefit me eventually. The judge reminded me that gratitude would help my recovery process. But online, in the spaces where Charlotte's influence couldn't reach, people were keeping track. 3 years passed, then 4. The trust fund grew under Charlotte's management and shrank with each administrative fee, each loan to herself, each investment that benefited her more than me. All legal, all documented, all approved by courts that saw what Charlotte wanted them to see. I learned to perform compliance while maintaining inner resistance. I smiled in therapy, thanked Charlotte in court, played the role of the rescued sister while documenting everything in hidden files, encrypted and backed up in places she'd never think to look. Maybe someday they'd matter. Maybe not, but documentation had become my form of prayer, my ritual of hope. Charlotte got engaged to a senior partner at her firm, someone who'd never questioned how she afforded her lifestyle on her salary. She asked me to be a bridesmaid, and Dr. Morse said refusing would show I hadn't processed my resentment. So I stood at her wedding in a dress she chose, smiling for photos that would show our healed relationship. The reception was at a hotel I recognized, the same place our parents had thrown her a party for getting that internship, the one that started everything. After 5 years, the judge suggested reducing oversight. Not ending the conservatorship, just loosening restrictions slightly. I could have my own bank account with a $500 limit. I could make purchases under $20 without pre-approval. Small freedoms that felt like mockery after years of complete control. But I started saving those small amounts, $20 here, $30 there. Hidden cash in places Charlotte wouldn't think to look. Not enough to fight legally, but enough to imagine escape. 7 years passed before everything changed. Charlotte had her second child and made another mistake. She posted about teaching her daughter's financial responsibility, about the importance of family support. But in the background of one photo, visible on her desk, were papers from the trust fund account. Someone enhanced the image, made out the numbers. The trust fund that had started at $45,000 should have grown to at least $60,000 with proper investment. The visible balance was under $15,000. This time, the questions weren't just online. A journalist looking into conservatorship abuse found my story, verified the timeline, started connecting dots. Charlotte tried to shut it down, but journalists have resources that victims don't. They found Liam, convinced him to talk on background. They found Rebecca, who finally agreed to tell her story. They found 3 other victims from Charlotte's workplace, all with similar patterns of blame and termination. The article ran in a major publication, carefully fact-checked and legally vetted. It didn't accuse Charlotte of crimes, just laid out the pattern of behavior, the timeline of events, the questions about the missing trust fund money. Suddenly, Charlotte's carefully constructed narrative started cracking. Her firm conducted an internal review of her expense accounts. The court ordered a full accounting of the conservatorship funds. Charlotte hired a crisis management firm, but some stories can't be managed once they break containment. The forensic accounting took 3 months. Charlotte had been careful, but not careful enough. The loans to herself, the administrative fees that exceeded normal rates, the investments that benefited her exclusively. Individually, each transaction was arguably legal. Together, they painted a picture of systematic financial exploitation. The judge, who'd rubber-stamped extensions for 7 years, finally started asking real questions. Charlotte's lawyer argued procedural issues, statute of limitations, the ambiguity of conservatorship law. But public pressure has a way of clarifying ambiguity. The conservatorship ended on a Tuesday in March, 7 years and 4 months after it began. No admission of wrongdoing, no apology from the court, just a quiet acknowledgement that I no longer needed supervision. The trust fund was gone, depleted by legal fees and administrative costs and loans that would never be repaid. Charlotte kept the house she'd bought with my inheritance. I walked out of the courthouse into spring rain that felt like baptism. The victim advocacy group that had helped others helped me now. They found me transitional housing, real housing, not a boarding house. They connected me with job training programs, legal aid for rebuilding credit, trauma counseling with therapists who understood financial abuse. The road back was longer than I'd imagined, but it existed. Charlotte's firm quietly let her go after the internal review. She filed for bankruptcy within a year, her lifestyle unsustainable without stolen funds. Our parents finally saw the truth but didn't know how to process it. They'd enabled one daughter to destroy the other, chosen the successful lie over the struggling truth. Some revelations break families permanently. I found work at a nonprofit helping conservatorship abuse victims. My documentation, obsessive and complete, helped build cases for others trapped in the system. My experience became expertise. My trauma transformed into advocacy. I started creating art again, slowly at first. My new work was darker, informed by loss, but also deeper. Pain had taught me things about human nature that comfort never could have. A gallery show happened 3 years after my freedom. Small venue, modest sales, but my name on the wall, my truth in visual form. Mom reached out after seeing the exhibition announcement. She wanted to reconcile, to find peace, to explain how Charlotte had fooled everyone. I considered it for a long time before responding. Some bridges can be rebuilt, but they're never the same. We meet for coffee sometimes, careful conversations about weather and recipes, avoiding the years of devastation that sit between us like a ghost. Charlotte lives quietly now in a small apartment, working administrative jobs, her reputation destroyed by the journalism that exposed her pattern. She sent a letter once, through a lawyer, suggesting we put the past behind us. Her daughters deserve to know their aunt. I didn't respond. Some relationships end not with explosion, but with absence. I'm 36 now, 11 years past that Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything. My life looks nothing like I'd imagined at 22. The art career I'd planned was derailed. The trust fund meant to help me was stolen. The family I'd trusted betrayed me for money I hadn't even known existed. But I survived. More than survived, I built something from the ashes Charlotte left. A quieter life than I'd planned, harder earned, but entirely mine. The boarding house residents I'd lived among, we still stay in touch. A network of survivors who understand that sometimes the greatest threat comes from those who share your DNA, your memories, your childhood home. Charlotte taught me about documentation, about systems, about how trust can be weaponized. She meant to destroy me with those lessons. Instead, I used them to save myself and others. There's a poetry in that, dark but satisfying. My art now sells to collectors who appreciate survival stories. Not famous, not wealthy, but sustainable. I can afford my own apartment, my own car, my own choices. After 7 years of controlled poverty, even small freedoms feel revolutionary. Sometimes young artists reach out, having found my work online. They see the gap in my resume, the lost years, and ask what happened. I tell them the truth. Sometimes family is the biggest threat to your dreams. Sometimes success isn't linear. Sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving what was meant to destroy you. I think about Charlotte occasionally, wonder if she ever feels guilt or if she's convinced herself she was trying to help. Probably the latter. People who plan destruction that carefully rarely have the capacity for genuine remorse. But I don't hate her anymore. Hate requires energy I'd rather spend on building the life she tried to steal. The $45,000 is gone forever, spent on Charlotte's ambitions and designer clothes. But I gained something worth more, the knowledge that I can survive anything, build from nothing, find beauty in the ruins. Charlotte's greatest cruelty became my greatest strength. Not the ending anyone would choose, but the one I earned through endurance. My story spread beyond the initial journalism, becoming a cautionary tale in legal textbooks, a case study in psychology journals, a rallying cry for conservatorship reform. Charlotte inadvertently created an advocate through her abuse, a voice for others trapped in similar situations. The girl who took the fall in 2019 to protect her sister died somewhere in that boarding house. The woman who emerged knows that protection without reciprocity is just exploitation with a prettier name. But that's the thing about survival. It changes you in ways you never expect. The soft parts that trusted easily get armored over. The naive belief in family loyalty gets replaced with harder wisdom. Charlotte stole my 20s and early 30s, years I'll never get back. But she also taught me that I'm stronger than I knew, more resilient than I believed, capable of rebuilding from absolute destruction. Would I choose this path if I could go back? Never. Am I grateful for who I've become because of it? Sometimes. That's the complexity of trauma transformed into purpose. The rain that started the day my conservatorship ended still falls sometimes, washing the Seattle streets clean. I watch it from my apartment window, safe and dry and free, thinking about the girl who once took the fall for a sister who was already planning her destruction. That girl deserved better than she got, but the woman she became, she earned every bit of peace she's found. And that's enough. After everything, that's more than enough.